Good evening, I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story, the digital platform that does a deep dive into the biggest issues of our time. On the program today, we are analyzing the proposal by the Yogi Adityanath government to legislate a two-child law. That's right. A series of incentives and disincentives, if the law goes through, will now make it impossible for those with more than two children to contest local body elections, to apply for a new government job. It will also limit the number of ration cards a family may get. There are also a series of incentives for those with a single child and those with two children, including increased increments, including subsidies on land, as well as free healthcare and education schemes. Experts are divided on the efficacy and the desirability of this new law. Many fear that it will end up punishing women who, in many parts of our country, still do not have reproductive rights and sexual autonomy. Experts are also pointing to an increasing stabilization in India's population numbers and the rate at which fertility rates are actually rising. But the Yogi Adityanath government could gain a massive popularity as well were this law to go through. The Law Commission currently has a draft of the legislation out inviting public comment. Let's introduce our panelists on the program today to look at this proposed two-child law. We have Anila Singh, who's a leader of the BJP from the state of Uttar Pradesh. Welcome, Anila ji, to the program. Poonam Muttreja, the head of the Population Foundation of India. This is very much her core expertise. This issue is with us as well. Radhika Ramaseshan, veteran journalist, someone who I have always said knows politics better than pretty much anyone in this country, is with us as well. Gurcharan, author, columnist, man of many parts, always an independent thinker. Pleasure to have you with us. And Yamini Aiyer, the president of the Center for Policy Research and one of our brightest thinkers, is also with us. Let me start with you, Anila ji, as a member of the BJP, to explain to us what is the thinking or the sudden need. Of course, Uttar Pradesh is India's most populous state. But, many people say that fertility rates are in fact stabilizing. क्या जरूरत पड़ी एकदम से इस कानून की या इस कानून की ड्राफ्ट की?
बरखा, there is a saying in Hindi, जितनी लंबी चादर है, आप उतने ही पैर पसारिए. So, like if you talk about Uttar Pradesh, I'm not going to talk about our country. We know it very well that it is a need of our country as well. But if we talk about Uttar Pradesh has a humongous population, almost 25 crores. And the type of area which we sustain, such a big population cannot be afforded. Like if we talk about, usually it is said that the population of Uttar Pradesh is as much as population of Brazil. But the area of Brazil is almost 12 times more than our Uttar Pradesh. And if you talk about the density, such a huge overloaded density of population is there in UP. And if you talk about UP people, UPites, what they are being imagined as bhaiyawalas. The people who work as laborers in factories, the people who draw thela and all, vegetable vendors, nothing more than that. We want Uttar Pradesh to be a hub of business. We want new unicorns here. But the thing is, since we have got such overloaded population in Uttar Pradesh, resources are depleting. So for coming generation, what we are going to leave? And we know it very well that if we see the national TFR, Uttar Pradesh is much ahead. Almost more than 56% of women in UP, they have more than 3 children. So we do not want women to be child producing machines. We want qualitative life for them and for the children as well. So
Okay, fair enough. I think none of us want women to be child producing machines, but also the reality of our country is that millions of women still do not have access to contraception. Millions of women do not have independence on what actually goes on in the bedroom, sometimes with sexual autonomy, sometimes with reproductive autonomy. But Poonam Muttreja, how will you explain to people why this is not a good idea? I'm assuming you think legislating a two-child norm is not a good idea. If you think it's not a good idea, Why is that? Because while you can still say don't punish, surely you can't argue against incentivizing. And there are some great incentives in this, including additional increments, subsidies on land, great welfare schemes for health and education. Why would you oppose incentives?
The bill, Barkha, doesn't have only incentives, it has disincentives. And if you look at the list of disincentives, most of them you won't even be able to implement. I am not against incentives, but what kind of, we should have real incentives which help communities control or regulate or have the number of children they want. And the question I want to answer first is, why am I opposed to the bill? I'm not only opposed to the bill, I think that will not gain, that will not contribute anything to the objectives of the UP government in any way. They have no basis or evidence or data driven. They are wish lists imposed on people without looking at the past history of family planning in India and globally. You have to look at what works and what doesn't work. So let me say that population stabilization is a goal that I believe in. Women in India across the country, including UP, and I'm going to focus more on UP today, women want fewer children. The wanted fertility rate for India is 1.8, which means they don't want more than 2 children.
Yeah.
I want to do some figures for UP. In UP, there is an 18.1% unmet need for family planning, which means that 18% of the births that are taking place in UP are unwanted. These are not, I'm not even referring to women going out and getting abortions as a proxy for contraception. I am referring to this unwanted fertility, which UP government cannot do through incentives and disincentives. It can
only... hang on. Why not incentives? I can understand the logic against penalties. What is your problem with legally having incentives?
Okay, so UP government and the entire country keeps talking about we have limited resources, and it is true, we have limited resources. 1.4% of our GDP is health, which is the lowest, you all know, in the whole country. Now, within that budget, only 4% is the budget for family planning at the national, I'm talking about national average. And we spend only 1.4% of that on spacing methods, and we spend 85% of that on sterilization.
Let me interject there to ask you, what I'm hearing you say is that the limited resources of UP, which finds a reference in this new draft, would be better spent on more contraception and easier access to contraception, in particular for women. Okay, I know there are many points you want to go through, but let me just get a few other responses. Yamini.
But can I just add one data? The one data I want to add here is that of the 85% of the expenditure which is on family sterilization, do you know how much we spend on incentives to both the woman who goes through sterilization and the promoter who brings her? We spend 75% of our budget on, within permanent methods, on incentives, and women experience family planning for the first time. 77% experience family planning for the first time when they go through sterilization, because we don't have much access or choice or quality in spacing methods. I'll stop here, and I'm sorry, Barkha, but I had to.
No, that's fine. I think we all agree on the principle that, that women are not baby-producing machines, to borrow from what Anila said. Yamini, but the approach to this stabilization of population has always been contested. We saw the Sanjay Gandhi years and what they led to, and now we are seeing this debate again. But again, I will say that do we not need to separate the strands of incentives and disincentives? And do we just take the baby out with the bathwater and say that that legislating, having a legislation per se is a bad idea, or do we welcome incentives and challenge disincentives? And can we unmute Yamini, please? Yeah.
Thanks, Barkha. I think let's look at this problem from a historical perspective. What do we know about the conditions under which fertility rates start dropping? There are two. One is development and relatedly empowerment of women. So any kind of incentives or disincentives need to be spoken about in that context. UP's challenge, as Anila ji rightly said, is a challenge of development. It is also, and it is in that context that this two-child bill is being framed. I would like to know if there is any part of this country that and India has enough variation where we know that there are many states that have been able to reduce their fertility rates significantly, and UP in fact is on that trajectory in any case, even if it's higher than the rest of the country, if its population rates are higher than this country, whether incentives and disincentives of this nature have helped. Two-child norms for government jobs, for standing in panchayat elections, have been experimented with in other parts of the country. Except for disempowering those who have a right and entitlement by virtue of being democratic citizens of this country, it has achieved nothing. Rajasthan tried this. Let us find out, did it actually help ensure that fertility was addressed, fertility rates dropped for women in Rajasthan because they introduced a two-child norm for panchayats? It didn't. Actually, it encouraged all kinds of perverse incentives that undermined the real objective of the law. So I think it's important for us to look in history, look at what we understand of economies, look at what we understand of what is it that shifts social norms and behavior. Development, governance, empowerment. These are the three magic bullet solutions. No law and no form of coercion is going to do that. What it will do, and the Indian state, it's not a UP issue, the Indian state who always approaches critical public health problems. We've seen this in COVID and no one has seen it better than you. Approaches public health problems from the perspective of a law and order problem. It breaks trust in the state. It makes it impossible for those who genuinely need to access the state to be able to access it. It breaks rights, whether we have a right to food, we have a right to work. These are entitlements that a democratic government has given all of its citizens, regardless of how many children they have. So it's in fact illegal in that sense when it comes to some of the disincentives that have been built into this particular law. And most of all, it's not going to give you the objective. People will find ways around it because public health cannot be solved through law and order.
Okay, let me bring in Gurcharan and Radhika, and then we can go around again. Gurcharan, the point is that Yamini and Poonam are speaking from years of expertise in this domain. It's what you call domain expertise. But my sense is, and this is what politicians look for, that if you were to do a dipstick poll of what most people feel, and I'm seeing it in the comments that we're getting in our live stream, most people would say great idea. Especially middle class sentiment would say great idea. And then of course it's the job of experts to add nuance, to add the layers to the conversation. Do you think, and I'm separating the political winnability of an idea from its public policy desirability. These are two different things. Do you think, Gurcharan Das, that Yogi Adityanath might have a winner of an idea here, politically speaking?
Well, those who are saying it's a great idea they are wrong, because frankly it's based on a kind of pop sociology, and the whole seed goes back to Malthus, who has been proven totally wrong, and that movement, the population bomb movement that was there in the 1970s. The reality is what Yamini has said is absolutely right. The best contraception is vikas. It is education, health, and opportunity for jobs. And of course, easy availability of contraceptives. That is really the answer. All the rest, the old idea was based, why they say oh, but it's a great idea, because they think that there's a roti and you have to divide a roti. And the roti, if it's divided between two people, you get half each. If it's divided between five people, you get only 1/5. But the reality is the roti grows. And no better than India to have shown in the last 20 years how, with a 7% growth rate, how that roti can grow. And so, therefore, that's why today we are not really talking about a population problem in the world. We're talking about a demographic dividend. How can countries enjoy a demographic dividend? And as very eloquently pointed out already by Yamini and Poonam, that India's total fertility rate, TFR, what they call, which is really children a woman will bear in a lifetime,
Yes.
has already been declining to the point that it's come down to 2.2, whereas the ideal is 2.1, which is the replacement rate. So we are very close. Now, the truth is, of course, that there's a north-south divide here. And 20 states, union territories, have already achieved the TFR, the target TFR. The problem is the cow belt. And that's the belt which is, well, it represents 40% of India's population. But that is really where we have a problem. But even UP has been coming down. It's down to 2.7. And a little more Vikas, attention to Vikas will get you there.
Okay, I love the line saying that the best contraception is Vikas, but we are looking at an election year for Uttar Pradesh in a few months from now, Radhika. And the politics of this cannot be separated from the complexity of it, right? And I still believe that in the politics of it, just like, Yogi Adityanath's other sort of strongman policies, let's say on encounters and so on, have actually led to at least the middle class of Uttar Pradesh saying colloquially, anecdotally, that law and order has improved. If for those of us who travel, this is the kind of thing you pick up. There's a chance that he will have popularity for this measure. What do you think, Radhika?
Yeah, Gurcharan ji alluded to the experience of the South. I'll just very briefly dwell on that. Tamil Nadu is a very good example where coercion was not used to stabilize the fertility rate. I mean, it was entirely by enhancing social indices, a more equitable model of development, and empowering women. Of course, it's not an ideal situation. Nobody is saying that. And the other southern states have also more or less emulated the same template, as a result of which, when we have the next delimitation, the southern states are going to lose out as compared to the cow belt states in terms of representation in the legislature. Okay, now to your question on Yogi Adityanath. The moment this idea was floated, maybe I'm wrong, but I looked at it with a degree of skepticism, just as I looked at the triple talaq law. Of course, I mean, the triple talaq law, as the BJP couched it, was meant to empower women, get them a better deal, and so on. But when the BJP and the RSS float such an idea, you do become a bit skeptical about about its inclusivity. And yesterday, if you go through Yogi Adityanath's opening statements on the population policy, the element that he emphasized on the most is, this is going to be inclusive. It's going to take all communities, and it is going to take all sections of the population. And the way it's been interpreted by the BJP and the RSS is slightly different. I mean, it is always community specific, demographic specific, and based on the assumption that there is one particular community that probably whose population increases outstrips that of the majority community.
Even though S.Y. Qureshi's book actually details how that is not true,
Exactly. Yeah.
But can I
The
interject to
the
say, can I interject to ask you that you think that instead of widespread support, there may in fact be murmurs of discontent within the Sangh base itself, like the statement from the VHP, and I'll come to Anila on that. The VHP has in fact shown some concerns. They're of course playing to this trope that you spoke about the Muslims outnumbering Hindus, which all data shows is not going to happen in India. But they're playing to that sentiment. They're playing to that perception. So are you saying, Radhika, that even politically this may not go down too well, even in the base?
No, I was a bit surprised at the VHP statement. What they said is, don't enforce the one-child norm. Let a family have two children. That is in order to achieve population parity. I think if I understood it right, that is
Yeah.
what the statement said. However, the political overtones are undeniable. It is being brought literally on the eve of an election where Yogi Adityanath's governance is going to be called into question. There is no doubt about that. I mean, the pandemic management or mismanagement, if you like, is too close, to people's concerns to be just brushed aside. Now, they briefly floated the idea of trifurcation. It kind of emanated from somewhere, but
Yeah.
it gained no traction. However, this particular idea, I think it will go down well with the middle classes, the upper classes,
Yeah.
the castes. There's no doubt. Just as Sanjay Gandhi was, in those days, 1 years. I mean, I don't have, I mean, very fresh memories or anything of that era, but I did hear my parents and the others kind of endorsing the idea of sterilization and,
Right.
and
Except let me argue this a little bit from the other way, that this is, and again, I think that we need some good answers from all of you on this. Why are incentives a bad idea? I totally get why disincentives are a bad idea, but we need to explain if some of you do think that incentives are a bad idea. But Anila, to the timing, how is it that this pops up, 6 months, 7 months before the election? Of course, people are going to be cynical.
Barkha, this is a very common question being asked by the opposition, especially, I'll say. And since this policy has been introduced or launched in Uttar Pradesh, I have been answering this question continuously. See, Barkha, we came into power in Uttar Pradesh in 2017. Fine. If you would have come up with this policy in 2018, though we needed time. It's not a just jiffy thingy. You come into power and you come with this policy. It needs lots of research work, and because it has to be in today's date, and it has to be for the future as well. So if you would have, hypothetically, if we would have brought it in 18, to kaha jata 19 mein chunav hai, aap lekar aa gaye hain. 20, we came up with two very, very strict laws, you know it very well, anti-conversion law and one jo damaged property ka tha. So again, we know it very well how, opposition, they made such hullabaloo about it, like you are anti-Muslims, that is why you brought up these two laws and all. But Yogi Adityanath ji, whatever he says, he do it. Now, in 21, we have brought up with this population policy, so people have started saying, "Arey, 22 में चुनाव है, तो आप 21 में ये जनसंख्या के ऊपर पॉलिसी लेकर आ गए हैं." And I know it very well that we are going to come up in 22 as well. Government is going to be formed in Uttar Pradesh.
पर आप एक बात बताइए, चलिए आप
have brought in Barkha, just allow me 30 more seconds, please. If you would have brought in 22 or 23, ये कहा जाता 24 में चुनाव है, आप इसलिए ले आए. So any person who has got strong political willpower, he will not care about the timing. He or she will simply do it. Now, I heard all the panelists, and the only concern which I found was that it is very easy to make the law, but it is very difficult to implement it. Yes, implementation is the major thing, because we have got n number of laws on various things. But I'm pretty sure in Uttar Pradesh, because it is need of the hour, I am pretty sure that the government is going to implement it very strongly. And when we read this population policy, Barkha, it starts with incentives. ये नहीं है कि आपने ये बताया कि अगर आप नहीं मानोगे तो हम आपके साथ ये कर देंगे, ये कर देंगे, ये कर देंगे. ये incentives हैं. आपकी मर्जी हो आप मान लो, आपकी मर्जी हो आप नहीं मानो.
Let's explore this a bit more. आपने ठीक बात कही कि जो incentives हैं वो हमारे panelists को बताना चाहिए कि उसमें क्या बुराई है. Now, Yamini, you spoke from the perspective of this not working. Why has it not worked is what we need to explain. Why do incentives not work? Disincentives, you can argue that women and men are not equal when it comes to sexual relations, when it comes to reproductive choices, when it comes to access to contraception. The burden, the responsibility is on the woman rather than on the man. We know this. Why are incentives a bad idea?
Incentives are a great idea as long as you have the right incentives. And that means incentives that address the core of the challenge. What is the core of the challenge behind high fertility rates? It has everything to do with women's lack of reproductive rights, or rather, women's lack of being able to have full control over their reproductive health. And secondly, it has to do with the context of development. Create those incentives. When you start incentivizing by saying you are going to get more paternity and maternity leave, when you say you are going to start incentivizing by preventing women with more than 2 children from standing for elections, or preventing families from getting government jobs, you're actually hurting those who need it the most. Who are the ones who are having large families? Not you and I. It is the poor who, as citizens of this country, as democratic citizens of this country, have rights that are given to this country by our lawmakers and our constitution. And we are actually not only taking away those rights, we are also hurting their chances of being able to get the right incentives, development, and concomitantly empowerment to be able to control their own reproductive health. Another really important thing that I want to say here is, just think of it from the examples of so-called incentives that we have used in policy consistently over the last many decades. One of the most recent examples has been the decision to reduce the maternity entitlements to women for their third child. What that does is hurt those women who need those entitlements to be able to get good nutrition, because these are not entitlements for anything apart from basic needs and basic necessities. It isn't addressing the problem. Women are not having less children because the government of India has decided, under its right to food, to reduce entitlements to women with more than 2 children, or not give them those entitlements for women with more than 2 children. Women are having those women are making their reproductive decisions, or are being forced to make those reproductive decisions due to a very different set of things. So in positive incentives that are about encouraging girls to come to school, that are about thinking harder about women's employment, India has the lowest female labor force participation for any other country of equivalent level of economic growth. These are the incentives that will create conditions where women have control over their reproductive rights, and women have greater bargaining power within the household to address this challenge of more children.
Okay, Poonam, normally or typically or classically, the poorer parts of the Indian citizenry have produced more children for a variety of reasons. The inequities in the healthcare system, the access to contraception is one. The other is the belief that more hands will mean more earning capacity at some point. But therefore, parts of this draft actually suggest schemes like a free education and healthcare for those who have single children. Let's pick up that specific proposal. Is that a bad idea according to you?
It is a bad idea because the second child, if they have a second child, it'll stop. What is the fault of the first child or the second child that they get education at the whims and fancies of a two-child norm?
The argument would be it would be an incentive to have only those 2 children, and therefore you would not need that for the third child.
But
right?
the problem is that women who are poor, the richer and middle class women, go for family planning services by and large to the private sector. The poor women in rural parts of India where family planning is inaccessible, the demand doesn't meet the supply does not meet the demand. You go to healthcare facilities and there are stockouts more often than, and not in this government only, it's actually improved in this government. We've had this problem for 45 years because there's a lot of corruption and money in buying commodities. But I'm not going to go that route and get into corruption and all those issues. We'll distract ourselves. Second, women who a lot of women also end up having more children because they do not have, given the social norms which Yamini raised, we haven't done anything to change social norms. So the husband and the mother-in-law control often, especially amongst the least educated, not just poor. And when Gurcharan said development is the best contraceptive pill, I agree with him, but within that, education is the best contraceptive pill. And Sri Lanka reduced its fertility by educating women and increasing age at marriage. If you look at UP, all these indicators are, UP and Bihar have the worst indicators.
So,
And in UP, there are women there are women who want, who have an unmet need. Why isn't the UP government focusing on meeting their need? They don't have the money, they don't have the health system, quality of
so
care.
you think provide better contraceptive methods, more
Exactly.
equally
That's
distributed. Okay.
as Gurcharan said, that's the main issue here. And on incentives, I want to say to Anila, it is not only incentives. Worse than, and I can give you 10 incentives, which will be good, like giving incentive to a ASHA to improve the quality, ensure that counseling is given to the woman, for instance, getting an injectable closer to her home. Give her incentive. I'm not just blindly against incentives, but they have to be rational, make sense.
Okay.
Panchayats for doing social norms and behavior change. But the worst, Barkha, is the disincentives. The fact that if you have a third child, they will not give ration for the third child. Why, in a state where malnutrition and child mortality is so high because of malnutrition, you are going to create serious problems in the state of UP. Final thing I want to say is there's two issues here. There's the population policy, which was released yesterday, by the way, which doesn't have two-child norm incentives or disincentives, and the chief minister and health minister didn't say a word. There is a parallel process going on, which is this bill. I don't want to comment on the politics of it, but it seems to me almost schizophrenic. I don't understand it. I want, if someone can explain to me. Look at this. I have read it from page to page. There's nothing about disincentives.
Well, because this is just a draft. This particular legislation is still a draft.
This is not a draft. No, Barkha.
No, not this. The proposal on the two-child law is a draft. Gurcharan, I still believe as a student of politics that it is going to be an uphill task to explain to people why this is a bad idea, because it will seem counterintuitive to most people to tell them, oh, this is actually not going to achieve what you wanted to achieve. And therefore, I think that the Yogi government is thinking politically. And yes, of course, there are some grave disincentives. In particular, the problematic ones to me seem to be to limit the number of ration cards, because you can't actually deny people access to food based on this. The other very problematic disincentive is to not be able to contest panchayat elections, because it's double punishment for women who are being compelled to produce children they may not want, and then not even have a chance at political representation. These leap out. But again, to, let's say, offer increments to those with smaller families in government jobs, to offer rebate on electricity bills for non-government jobs. What's the problem with this, Gurcharan?
The problem is this, that an incentive becomes a disincentive for me. In other words, it creates an environment. It creates an environment which you may say is a good thing, but in fact, it works in a way that then a woman with a third child is stigmatized, is either through her family, through her friends, her neighbors, everybody. She is her esteem becomes an issue. And you know, this policy, ironically, seems to be coming at a point when China has abandoned its child policy as a failure. And it is coming at a time when Bangladesh has shown that the issue is not religion here, that the Muslim population of Bangladesh has performed brilliantly in terms of precisely in being able to bring down its population rate. So what this is here, what is problematic here, and I agree with you, it's going to be very difficult. These things we are discussing are no buzzwords. I said the best contraception is vikas, or you can say padhai, for the girl child, as Poonam said. But the reality, and even if you quote Bangladesh numbers, quote China's experience, people say, wo to alag log hain, alag log hain.
Right. It's a deep-seated sort of trope that has a market. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the one thing that a lot of people will remember is the last time India tried to control population in this way was during Indira Gandhi's time. And what happened to Indira Gandhi? She was thrown out. So, Mr. Yogi Adityanath, learn from that historical experience. People remember that. They remember that it was that when you take away people's basic rights like this, people don't like it.
Okay, that's a very powerful statement. I want Radhika to respond to it, and then we need to go into last comments. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left on the program. Radhika, the Nasbandi drives of Sanjay Gandhi that were the prelude to emergency and then the dethroning of Indira. Is that a template that can be applied to Yogi, as Gurcharan suggests, or is this a much smarter, and when I say smarter, I don't mean again from public policy perspective, but from the political framework? Is this because, he's not actually doing forced sterilizations and so on?
Yeah,
or suggesting that.
Talked about, sure. He's parceled incentives and disincentives in almost equal measure. But the way Yogi Adityanath has conducted himself in other aspects, like handling the CAA, fallout of the CAA issue, and generally related to issues related to law and order, I do not see him adopting a particularly soft approach. And this is going to affect both communities, because let's not forget, UP is strongly wedded to age-old cultural norms. I mean, there is a distinct son preference. And what if your first two children happen to be girls, female? I mean, there is always pressure from the family that, there must be a son, an heir, and so on and so forth. I mean, you see it in the villages. And the other point I want to make is, when we are talking about reproductive rights, it's very nice to sit here and debate. But if you go to a UP village and there is an elected woman, a female pradhan, who's gotten through the reservation route, she is never allowed to speak. In election after election, I've sought out these women pradhans, and I wanted to speak to them, and I'm told by the men that it's all right, you will have your 10 or 15 minutes with her, but she has to answer to us.
But then aren't you proving Yogi's point? He'd say, I'm taking on this conservatism that is tilted against women.
He's not saying that, but he would. He's not talking about empowerment of women. Would mean what Kamraj did in Tamil Nadu, namely introduce the midday meal scheme and extend it, especially in order to incentivize girls, because families were sending boys to schools, but they were not sending girls, and that was one instance. MGR, he gave bicycles to girls, particularly. That was a
and actually what we haven't noticed is scheme. And one of the things that's actually happened in COVID, by the way, is an interesting detail that I've picked up on the ground, is many more underage girls being pushed into child marriages again, because as children fall out of the school system, if there's only one mobile device at home for an online class, if there's a boy, the boy will get it if the girl wants, and 15-year-old girls are again being told ki ab jaake shaadi kariye. Now, what is complicated, Yamini, and I'll start taking last comments from here. What is complicated is to explain to people why this is not actually helping that 15-year-old kid who's going to be forced into a marriage, or that young 20-something bride who's being forced to have more children before she's ready, and so on. For most people who will take away a very simplistic understanding from this, they will say it will help women. And we need to be able to explain why it won't, why it might in fact punish them.
Barkha, we've talked so much about the policy outside of fundamental basic rights of citizens, and core to that is choice. Okay, I'm one of three siblings. If my parents had been incentivized not to produce my younger sister, my life would have been incomplete. It was my my parents' choice to do so, just as it was mine to not have two children. When this discourse is framed in terms of rights and choice, which is the language in which a democratic country should be talking about this, you will see a very different approach to this challenge, an approach that recognizes women's reproductive rights and ensures that they have access to safe contraception, an approach that focuses on governance and development to ensure that rights of citizens are fulfilled, and an approach that ensures that questions of family size are determined on the basis of informed and equitable choice. That's the approach to addressing the challenge of population, not using law and order, which inevitably will result in coercion. We may talk about incentives and disincentives. All of us who've looked at government programs over decades know exactly how a broken state responds. It focuses on disincentives and coercion. It rarely gets the incentives right. We will have another version of further disempowerment of families and a society that after COVID has pushed 75 million people back into poverty. We need to think about that.
Okay, Anila Singh, what about choice? What about the choice to make?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
But first of all those people who are saying that, all those people who are comparing this particular policy with that, what Sanjay Gandhi ji did. So first of all, there is absolutely no comparison in between two, and there is a futile exercise, so please do not do it. Yes, I totally agree with Mr. Das when he said that development is the key for the control of population. Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. But sir, यहाँ पे यही है ना कि अंडा पहले आया कि मुर्गी पहले आई. Development के लिए भी we need control population. We have to give them quality life, but for that, definitely we need small pocket of population for the state. I'm not discussing my country today. I'm totally discussing Uttar Pradesh. And you mentioned that health, education, and contraception are the three verticals on which population can be reduced. You are absolutely correct. And all these three are mentioned in this population policy. If we talk about contraception, like if we talk about condoms, like in today's date, only 10.81% people are using condoms. So we are planning that by 2030, it should go around 17%. And if we talk about modern contraception in today's date, only 31% of people are using modern contraception. We want to increase it till 50 to 53% by 2030. And if we talk about education, sir, we have planned to bring contraception thing and the sex education in our curriculum so that children should be taught that you have to. I mean, I'm telling you about the health also. If we talk about malnourishment, if we talk about infant mortality rate, if we talk about the mortality rate of newborn mother, then everything we are going to reduce. I have got all
Okay, thank you for sharing that, and that's a reasonable thing to ask Gurcharan to respond to as his closing comment, that there's a cyclical dimension to this, that you actually need to stabilize the population before you can actually build a sustainable development model.
That was the way we used to think, and it turned out to be wrong. The reality is that in country after country, and this Poonam and Yamini can give you so many statistics. Every place we have found that it's not whether you put the egg or the chicken first. The reality is that just giving people education, especially women, proper nutrition, health, and access to contraceptives, these, and of course, employment, creating employment opportunities are the way. Now, you know, the downside, Anila ji, of this policy, with this two-child policy, is the darkness. Some people have hinted at this, that what if there's a third child? What if somebody gets a third child? Well, you're saying that you're pushing people into unhygienic abortions. You are taking your state into a gender imbalance. You're changing you're taking your state to female infant feticide. You're taking your state into, I mean, China has learnt all these lessons. And
Okay.
therefore, it is a very dangerous thing. And Yamini said, the way the challenges, and Barkha has been saying, how do you explain this to people? That one notion of, she said, choice. That this is one of the things that to be a human being is to be able to decide, on this one.
My suspicion, though, is that it will still create resonance of a political nature among those who have opted for fewer children. I could be wrong. I'm also reading the politics of it, not just the policy of it. Poonam, quickly, your last thoughts, and then Radhika can close for us.
So, the child sex ratios in UP are 903 girls to 1,000 boys. And this is the decline that has happened in the last 5 years from 995. Do you know, we all know, that as fertility declines, people practice sex selection. But when you make this 2-child norm or 1-child norm, China showed to us, but we also saw in India when panchayats, Nirmala Butch did a study. We had adverse implementation of the 2-child norm in panchayats. We not only had very steep worsening sex ratios, but we had unsafe abortions, we had men divorce wives on paper, we had run up to the body elections, families gave up children for adoption. And this is Nirmala Butch, the former secretary of Madhya Pradesh, an IAS officer.
Yeah.
I want to say at the end, UP the fertility is declining very fast in UP. NFHS data hasn't come out, but our estimation and many demographers is that your population is, when the results come out, as soon as the health minister releases it, your population is going to be close to less than or close to 2.5. And there was a commission set up by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, which says that UP's fertility rates will be 2.1 in 2025.
Okay. Sorry, I think we just lost you at that last sentence. But Poonam, sorry, we couldn't make out the last sentence. But I think what I'm hearing is that once we have the official data out. Sorry, Poonam, we can't hear you at the end, but I'll ask Radhika to. Sorry, you're still trying to say something? Let me just give it another shot. Poonam?
The fertility rates, when the NFHS data comes out for UP, which will be as soon as the health minister is ready to release, is going to be less than 2.5.
We got that. Yeah, we got that.
And then there is a commission by the government that was set up, by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, expert committee was set up, and UP's population will be replacement level 2.1 in 2025. And finally, bureaucracy in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare gave a fantastic affidavit against the Supreme Court and High Court PIL submitted by members of the BJP, a member of the BJP, and they gave a fantastic affidavit against the 2-child norm, and the Supreme Court and High Court dismissed this PIL in one hearing. Why don't you look at that? Why don't you talk to people in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare before you think about going ahead with this law?
I have to close, but Radhika, all of this said, is it your sense that UP is a sort of first step experiment for what may happen now? Will we see this coming up and getting more play in Parliament, for example? Is this a test case scenario, or is this, you think, Yogi Adityanath's own sort of scheme ahead of elections?
It's not Yogi Adityanath's own scheme. The RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat, did flag it in his in various speeches in the recent past. And BJP MPs have introduced private member bills in the Lok Sabha and in the forthcoming session, already Ravi Kishan Shukla, who is the MP from Gorakhpur, he has said that he's going to introduce a private member's bill. So the political overtones are unmistakable. And, interestingly, there was a response from the Sambalpur MP of the Samajwadi Party, Shafiqur Rahman Bar. He's already said that this goes against the will of Allah and we must muster strength from Allah and oppose this tooth and nail. And this is exactly the kind of response which the BJP wants. So as far as I see the issue playing out, it may not go down with the rural masses, whether they are Hindus or Muslims or MBCs or OBCs, but I think it could click in the urban areas and with the upper castes.
And create a kind of polarization of the kind that you're suggesting.
Create, yeah.
It as one more Hindu-Muslim fault line. All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. I hope our audience learned a lot. The headline sounds great, but if you examine it more deeply, and I know it's counterintuitive to suggest so, but all of our experts today have argued that disincentives in particular, penalizing people, might just end up punishing women and poor women at that. So that's something to think about. We leave it there. We'll continue to follow this up. I'm sure there'll be a lot of debate around this. Thank you, Anila, Yamini, Gurcharan, Radhika, and Poonam. And thanks to our audience. See you tomorrow, same time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.